The summer sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet, suburban neighborhood. The streets were alive with the sounds of children laughing, bicycles whirring, and the occasional bark of a distant dog. Among the bustle, a young boy named Ethan pedaled his well-worn bike along the cracked pavement, his backpack bouncing lightly with each turn of the wheels. At just 11 years old, Ethan had an unshakable sense of right and wrong, the kind that made him stand out in ways he didn't yet realize. Ethan was on his way home from the park when he noticed something unusual in the small alley that cut between two rows of houses. It was a muffled yelp, sharp and filled with fear. His heart skipped a beat. He slowed his bike and craned his neck, trying to pinpoint the sound. That's when he saw a group of older boys huddled together, their backs turned to him, their movements deliberate and harsh. At first, Ethan couldn't tell what was happening. But then he spotted the source of the noise, a small, scruffy dog trembling in the dirt. Its fur was matted and patchy, its ribs faintly visible beneath its skin. The boys were taunting it, their voices loud and cruel as they poked and prodded the helpless creature. Ethan felt a surge of anger and fear rise in his chest. He wasn't the kind of kid who looked for trouble, but he couldn't just ride away and pretend he hadn't seen anything. Taking a deep breath, he gripped his handlebars tighter and approached the group. Hey, stop that!" he shouted, his voice shaking but firm. The boys turned to face him, their expressions a mix of surprise and defiance. One of them, a tall kid with a baseball cap tilted backward, stepped forward. "What's it to you?" he sneered. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "It's wrong. Leave the dog alone." For a moment, there was silence. The other boys exchanged glances, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what they would do next, but he wasn't going to back down. Finally, with a shrug and a muttered insult, the leader motioned for the others to follow him. "Whatever, man. It's just a dumb stray." They sauntered off, their laughter fading into the distance. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath and knelt beside the dog. Its big brown eyes stared up at him, filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, reaching out a hand. The dog flinched at first, but then sniffed his fingers cautiously. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered. As he carefully scooped the dog into his arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about this little creature. It wasn't just the way it had trusted him so quickly, or the way it seemed to relax in his hold. There was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Ethan decided to take the dog home, at least for the night. He'd figure out what to do in the morning. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that this scruffy stray was no ordinary dog. It belonged to someone important, someone whose name was known far and wide. And Ethan's act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Ethan carried the dog carefully, cradling it like a fragile treasure as he walked his bike the rest of the way home. The little creature seemed to relax in his arms, though its body still trembled slightly. He whispered soothing words, hoping to calm it. "It's okay now. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you anymore." When he reached his house, a modest 2-story home with peeling white paint and a slightly crooked mailbox, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure how his mom would react to him bringing a stray dog inside. Money was tight, and they already had their hands full with everyday expenses. Still, he couldn't leave the dog out here alone, not after what it had been through. Pushing the door open, Ethan stepped inside and called out, "Mom, I'm home." From the kitchen, his mom's voice floated back. "Hi, honey. Dinner's almost ready. Wash up." Ethan glanced down at the dog, whose wide eyes were scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Okay. Be right there," he called back. Quietly, he slipped upstairs to his room, closing the door gently behind him. He set the dog down on his bed, where it immediately curled up into a tight ball. Ethan knelt beside it, studying its scruffy appearance. Its fur was a mix of white and caramel, though it was hard to tell under all the dirt. A small patch of fur on its left ear was missing, and there were faint scratches along its legs. You've been through a lot, huh? Ethan murmured. The dog blinked at him but didn't move. He grabbed an old towel from his closet and a small bowl of water from the bathroom. As he gently wiped the dirt from the dog's fur, he noticed something shiny around its neck. Pushing the fur aside, he found a small, worn collar. Attached to it was a metal tag, its surface scratched but still legible. Ethan squinted at the engraving. The name Buddy was etched on one side, and on the other was a phone number. His heart raced. This wasn't just a stray, it belonged to someone. But who? And why was it out here, alone and in such bad shape? He wanted to call the number right away, but something stopped him. What if the owner wasn't a good person? What if they had abandoned Buddy or let him get hurt? Ethan didn't want to send the dog back into a bad situation. For now, he decided to keep Buddy safe. He would figure out what to do later. As the days passed, Ethan grew closer to Buddy. The dog's initial wariness faded, replaced by a gentle loyalty that warmed Ethan's heart. Buddy followed him everywhere, from the kitchen to the backyard, his tail wagging faintly whenever Ethan spoke to him. But there was something strange about Buddy, something Ethan couldn't quite explain. He seemed different. It wasn't just the way he carried himself, with a quiet dignity that didn't match his scruffy appearance. It was the way people reacted to him. One afternoon, Ethan took Buddy for a walk around the neighborhood. As they passed the local park, a woman jogging by suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she stared at Buddy. "Is that?" she began, but then shook her head as if dismissing the thought. Another time, a man at the corner store did a double-take when he saw Buddy tied up outside. He looked as though he wanted to say something, but changed his mind and walked away. Ethan couldn't help but wonder, who was Buddy? One evening, as Ethan was brushing Buddy's fur, his mom knocked on the door. She stepped inside, her arms crossed. "Ethan, we need to talk about the dog," she said gently. Ethan's stomach sank. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I couldn't leave him out there. He was in trouble." She sighed, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I understand, sweetheart, but we can't keep him. We don't have the resources. And what if someone's looking for him?" Ethan hesitated, then showed her the collar and tag. "He has an owner, but I don't know if they're a good one. What if they're the reason he ended up like this?" His mom frowned, taking the tag and studying it. "We can't just assume the worst. Maybe he got lost. We should at least try calling the number." Reluctantly, Ethan nodded. His mom pulled out her phone and dialed. Ethan held his breath as the line rang. After a few moments, a voice answered. "Hello? Ho? Hi, I'm calling about a dog named Buddy. We found him, and he has your number on his tag," Ethan's mom explained. There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end said, "Oh my God! You found him? Is he okay? Where is he?" The relief in the person's voice was genuine, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Buddy's owner did care about him. They arranged to meet at a nearby park the next day. Ethan was nervous as he walked Buddy to the park, his mom by his side. He didn't know what to expect. When they arrived, a sleek black car was already parked near the entrance. A man stepped out, dressed in a casual but expensive-looking jacket. He was tall, with sunglasses perched on his head and an air of quiet confidence. The man's eyes lit up when he saw Buddy. "There you are, boy," he exclaimed, kneeling down as Buddy ran to him, tail wagging furiously. Ethan watched, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was happy that Buddy seemed to recognize the man, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. As the man stood up, he turned to Ethan and his mom. "Thank you for finding him. I've been searching everywhere. You don't know how much this means to me." Ethan nodded, still unsure what to say. The man hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry. I should introduce myself. My name's James. James Carter." Ethan's mom gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Ethan looked at her, confused. "Who's James Carter?" he asked. She turned to him, her eyes wide. He's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Ethan's jaw dropped as he looked back at James, who smiled sheepishly. I guess I should have mentioned that, James said. Ethan's mind raced. He had saved a dog that belonged to a celebrity? But why was Buddy out on the streets? And what had happened to him? James seemed to sense Ethan's confusion. There's a lot to explain, he said. But first, I want to thank you properly. How about we grab some ice cream and talk? Ethan nodded, still trying to process everything. As they walked toward a nearby calf, Buddy trotting happily beside them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The calf was quiet, with the faint hum of conversation and the clinking of cups in the background. Ethan sat across from James Carter, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he was sitting with one of the most famous actors in the world. Buddy lay at Ethan's feet, his tail wagging lazily, as if he were perfectly content to be there. James leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. First, I need to say it again, thank you. You have no idea how much Buddy means to me. He's more than just a pet, he's family. Ethan nodded, his curiosity growing. How did he end up out there? He looked so scared and hurt. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's a long story. Buddy went missing a few weeks ago while I was filming out of town. I left him with a friend I trusted, but something went wrong. There was a break-in at their house, and Buddy got out. We've been searching ever since. Ethan's mom spoke up, her voice gentle. It sounds like he's been through a lot. But he's a strong little guy. James smiled faintly. He is. But there's something else you should know. Buddy isn't just any dog. He's trained for special purposes. Ethan tilted his head, confused. Special purposes. James hesitated, glancing around the calf as if to make sure no one was listening. Then he lowered his voice. Buddy was part of a security program. He's trained to detect danger, things like explosives or other threats. I adopted him after he retired from the program, but his instincts are still sharp. That's why he's so unique. Ethan's eyes widened. You mean he's like a secret agent dog? James chuckled softly. Something like that. But it also means that whoever took him might have known his background. And that worries me. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He thought back to the boys in the alley, the way they had been so aggressive toward Buddy. Do you think someone was trying to hurt him? He asked quietly. James's expression grew serious. It's possible. That's why I need to figure out who's behind this. And now that Buddy's safe, I think he might be able to help us. Ethan exchanged a glance with his mom. The idea of Buddy being part of something so dangerous was hard to believe, but the way James spoke made it clear he wasn't exaggerating. As they left the calf, James thanked them again and offered to drive them home. Ethan was hesitant at first, but his mom agreed, and soon they were all in James's sleek car, Buddy curled up in the back seat. On the way, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Excuse me for a moment, he said, pulling over and stepping out of the car to take the call. Ethan watched him through the window, noticing the way James's expression shifted from calm to tense. When he got back in, his jaw was tight. Is everything okay? Ethan's mom asked. James nodded, but his voice was clipped. It's fine. Just some business I need to handle. Ethan wasn't convinced. There was something in James's eyes, a flicker of worry that he couldn't hide. When they arrived at Ethan's house, James turned to him. Ethan, I owe you more than just a thank you. You saved Buddy, and that means the world to me. But I need you to be careful. If you see or hear anything unusual, let me know right away. Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned with unease. Okay, pay. I will. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about everything James had said. Buddy wasn't just a stray dog. He was part of something much bigger. And if someone had gone to the trouble of taking him, it meant they might still be out there. The next day, Ethan noticed something strange. A black car was parked down the street, its windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. It had been there when he left for school, and it was still there when he came home. He mentioned it to his mom, but she dismissed it as a coincidence. "Probably just a neighbor's visitor," she said. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. That evening, as he played with Buddy in the backyard, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. A figure darted behind a tree, too quick for him to get a good look. "Who's there?" Ethan called out, his voice trembling. There was no answer, just the rustle of leaves in the wind. Buddy stood at attention, his ears perked and his body tense. He let out a low growl, a sound Ethan had never heard from him before. Ethan's heart pounded. He grabbed Buddy's collar and hurried back inside, locking the door behind him. When he told his mom what had happened, she frowned but tried to reassure him. "It's probably just your imagination, sweetie. But I'll keep an eye out, okay?" Ethan nodded, but he knew what he'd seen. Someone was watching them. Over the next few days, the feeling of being followed only grew stronger. The black car appeared again, parked a little farther down the street this time. And once, while Ethan was walking Buddy, he spotted a man in a dark jacket standing at the corner, staring at them. Ethan decided to call James. When he explained what was happening, James's voice was calm but firm. "Stay inside and keep Buddy close. I'll be there as soon as I can." An hour later, James arrived, his face set in a grim expression. He brought a small device with him, which he used to scan the area around the house. Ethan watched as James worked, his movements quick and efficient. When James finally spoke, his tone was serious. "Ethan, I think you're right. Someone's been watching you. And I think they're after Buddy." Ethan's stomach dropped. Why? What do they want with him?" James hesitated, then said, "I think it has to do with his training. Buddy might know something important. And whoever's behind this doesn't want us to find out." Ethan felt a mix of fear and determination. He looked down at Buddy, who was sitting calmly by his side, as if he understood everything that was happening. "We'll keep him safe," Ethan said firmly. James nodded, but his eyes were filled with worry. "I hope so. Because whoever's after him won't stop until they get what they want." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach as James's words sank in. The idea that someone dangerous was after Buddy made his small, quiet life feel suddenly overwhelming. But one look at Buddy, sitting calmly at his feet, gave him a strange sense of courage. This little dog had been through so much already, and Ethan wasn't about to let anyone hurt him again. James spent the rest of the evening explaining what they needed to do. "I have a safe place where Buddy can stay for now," he said. "It's secure, and it'll give us time to figure out who's behind this." Ethan's heart sank at the thought of letting Buddy go, even temporarily. "Can't he stay here?" "I'll keep him safe, I promise." James shook his head gently. "It's not about you, Ethan. I know you'd do everything you could. But these people, they're professionals. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. I can't take that risk." Ethan's mom, who'd been quietly listening, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's for the best, sweetheart. We just want everyone to be safe." Reluctantly, Ethan nodded. "Okay, pay. But can I at least say goodbye?" James smiled faintly. "Of course." That night, Ethan sat on the floor of his room with Buddy curled up beside him. He stroked the dog's fur, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the best dog I've ever met, Buddy. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll never forget you." Buddy looked up at him with those big, soulful eyes, as if he understood every word. The next morning, James arrived early to pick up Buddy. Ethan handed him over reluctantly, his chest tight with emotion. "Take care of him," he said, his voice cracking. "I will," James promised. "And I'll keep you updated." As James drove away, Ethan felt a deep sense of loss. The house seemed quieter, emptier without Buddy's presence. But something else nagged at him, a feeling that this wasn't over. That afternoon, Ethan decided to take his mind off things by going for a bike ride. He pedaled aimlessly through the neighborhood, the cool breeze doing little to ease his worries. As he turned onto a quiet street, he noticed a familiar black car parked at the curb. His heart skipped a beat. He slowed down, trying to act casual as he passed by. The windows were still tinted, and he couldn't see who was inside. But as he rounded the corner, he heard the faint hum of an engine starting. Ethan glanced back and saw the car pulling out, slowly following him. His palms grew sweaty on the handlebars. He turned down another street, then another, but the car stayed behind him, keeping its distance. Panic set in. He couldn't lead them back to his house, not with his mom there. Instead, he pedaled toward the park, hoping to lose them in the maze of trails and trees. As he reached the park entrance, Ethan veered off the main path and into the woods. The car couldn't follow him here, but he didn't stop. He kept going, weaving through the trees until he was sure he was alone. He finally came to a stop, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The woods were eerily quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. But then he heard something, a faint crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He turned slowly, scanning the trees. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaking. There was no response, just the sound of the footsteps growing closer. Ethan gripped his bike tightly, ready to bolt if he needed to. But before he could move, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in dark, practical clothing. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Ethan, right?" she said, her voice steady. Ethan stared at her, unsure whether to trust her. "Who are you?" She took a step closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "My name's Claire. I work with James. He sent me to check on you." Ethan frowned, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "If James sent you, why didn't he call me first?" Claire hesitated, then said, "There wasn't time. We think the people after Buddy might have figured out where he is. We need to act fast." Ethan's mind raced. She sounded convincing, but something about her story didn't add up. James would have told him if someone else was involved. "I don't believe you," he said finally, taking a step back. Claire's expression hardened. "Ethan, this isn't a game. If you know something about Buddy's location, you need to tell me now." Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening on his bike. "I don't know anything. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." Before Ethan could respond, a rustling sound came from behind him. He turned to see another figure stepping out of the trees, a man this time, tall and broad-shouldered. Ethan's pulse quickened. He was outnumbered, and he had no idea who these people really were. Without another word, he jumped on his bike and pedaled as fast as he could, weaving through the trees. He could hear Claire shouting behind him, but he didn't look back. As he burst out of the woods and onto the main road, he spotted a familiar car approaching. Relief flooded through him as he realized it was James. Ethan waved frantically, and James slammed on the brakes, jumping out of the car. "Ethan, what's going on?" "They're after me." Ethan gasped, pointing toward the woods. James's face darkened. "Get in the car." "Now, no." Ethan didn't hesitate. As they sped away, James glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw clenched. Who was it? Ethan described Claire and the man, his voice trembling. James's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "They're not with me. They're part of the group that's after Buddy." Ethan's stomach dropped. What do they want with him? James's expression was grim, something they shouldn't have. "And now, they know you're involved." Ethan's heart raced as James's words sank in. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and he was caught in the middle of a dangerous game. The car sped through the quiet streets, James gripping the wheel tightly as he glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his heart pounding. The events of the past hour felt like a blur, but one thing was clear: he was in danger, and so was Buddy. "Where's Buddy now?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. James hesitated for a moment before answering. He's safe. I moved him to a secure location this morning, but it won't stay that way if they find out where he is. Ethan swallowed hard. Who are these people? Why are they so desperate to get him? James's expression was grim. It's not just about Buddy. It's about what he knows, or rather, what he's trained to detect. He was part of a program that uncovered sensitive information during his time in service. That information could expose some very powerful people, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep it hidden. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process what James was saying. Buddy wasn't just a stray dog with a mysterious past. He was the key to something much bigger. As they approached a quiet, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, James pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. "Stay close to me," he said, his tone firm. "We're safer inside." The building looked abandoned from the outside, but once they stepped through the door, Ethan saw high-tech setup monitors, surveillance equipment, and a small team of people working quietly but efficiently. "Is this where Buddy is?" Ethan asked, looking around. James shook his head. No. He's at another location, but this is where we'll figure out our next move." Before Ethan could respond, one of the team members approached James with a concerned expression. "We've got a problem," she said, holding out a tablet. James took it, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the screen. "They've tracked us here," he muttered. Ethan's stomach dropped. What do we do? James turned to the team. "We need to move. Now. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the team packed up their equipment and prepared to leave. Ethan stuck close to James, his nerves on edge. As they exited the building and climbed into another vehicle, Ethan noticed a figure standing in the shadows across the street. It was Claire. She was on the phone, her eyes locked on them. "She's watching us," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. James glanced in her direction, his jaw tightening. "Hold on," he said, hitting the gas. The car sped away, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see Claire or the black car at any moment. After what felt like an eternity, James pulled into a secluded warehouse and parked inside. "This is it," he said. "Buddy's here." Ethan felt a wave of relief as he stepped out of the car and saw Buddy running toward him. The little dog barked happily, his tail wagging furiously. But the relief was short-lived. As Ethan knelt to hug Buddy, the sound of tires screeching outside made everyone freeze. "They found us," James said, his voice low but urgent. The team sprang into action, securing the doors and preparing for what was coming. Ethan held Buddy tightly, his heart racing. The sound of footsteps echoed outside, followed by a loud bang as the door was forced open. Claire and the man from the woods stepped inside, flanked by two others. "Hand over the dog," Claire said, her voice cold and commanding. James stepped forward, his expression calm but defiant. "You're not getting him." Claire smirked. "You can't protect him forever, James. We know what he's capable of. Just give him to us, and no one gets hurt." Ethan felt a surge of anger. Buddy's not just some tool for you to use. He's a living being, and he deserves better than this. Claire's eyes flicked to Ethan, her smirk fading. "You don't understand what's at stake, kid." Before she could say more, Buddy let out a low growl. He wriggled free from Ethan's arms and darted toward one of the men, who was holding a small device. Buddy jumped, knocking the device to the ground. The man stumbled back, and James seized the opportunity to act. He tackled another of the intruders, while the rest of the team moved in to help. Ethan watched in shock as chaos erupted around him. Buddy was in the thick of it, using his agility and training to outmaneuver their attackers. Amid the commotion, Claire grabbed the fallen device and bolted for the door. Ethan didn't think he just reacted. He ran after her, determined not to let her get away. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse. Claire glanced back, her expression a mix of frustration and surprise. "Stay out of this, kid." But Ethan didn't stop. He lunged for her, grabbing her arm and knocking the device out of her hand. It clattered to the ground, and Buddy was there in an instant, standing protectively over it. Claire glared at Ethan, but before she could make another move, James and the team surrounded her. "It's over," James said firmly. Claire's shoulders sagged in defeat, but her eyes still burned with anger. "You think this changes anything? There are others. They won't stop." James didn't respond. He signaled for one of his team members to secure Claire and her accomplices. As the intruders were led away, Ethan knelt beside Buddy, his heart finally beginning to slow. "You did it, Buddy," he said softly. "You're amazing." James crouched beside them, a small smile on his face. "You're not too bad yourself, Ethan. You were brave back there." Ethan looked up at him, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over him. "What happens now?" James's expression grew serious. "Now we make sure Buddy stays safe. And we make sure the people behind this are held accountable." Ethan nodded, knowing that while the immediate danger was over, the fight wasn't entirely finished. But for now, he was just grateful that Buddy was safe and that they'd faced it all together. As they left the warehouse, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the horizon. It felt like a new beginning, one filled with hope and the promise of better days ahead. But somewhere in the distance, a shadow lingered, a reminder that some battles were far from over. The drive back to Ethan's house was quiet, the adrenaline from the night slowly fading. Buddy sat in Ethan's lap, his head resting on the boy's arm, as if he, too, was relieved it was all over. James occasionally glanced at them in the rearview mirror, a faint smile softening his usually stern face. Ethan's mom was waiting at the door when they arrived. Her face was a mix of worry and relief as she pulled Ethan into a tight hug. "I was so scared," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm okay, Mom," Ethan reassured her. "And so is Buddy." She knelt down, stroking Buddy's fur. "You're a brave little dog, aren't you?" James stayed for a while, explaining everything to Ethan's mom, who the people after Buddy were, why they wanted him, and how they had been stopped, at least for now. "We'll make sure they're dealt with properly," he promised. "But I need you to know there's always a chance they'll try again. Buddy is special, and that makes him a target." Ethan's mom looked worried, but Ethan spoke up. "We'll keep him safe, no matter what." James hesitated, then nodded. "I believe you will. But I'll also be checking in regularly. You're not alone in this." Over the next few days, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be with everything they'd been through. Buddy quickly settled into his new life, becoming a beloved member of the family. Ethan's mom, who had been hesitant at first about keeping a dog, found herself charmed by Buddy's gentle nature and loyalty. Ethan couldn't walk down the street without neighbors stopping to admire Buddy and ask about his story. Ethan kept the details vague, saying only that Buddy had been through a lot but was now safe and happy. One afternoon, as Ethan and Buddy were playing in the yard, James pulled up in his car. Ethan ran to greet him, curious about the unexpected visit. "I've got news," James said, stepping out of the car. "Good news." Ethan's heart raced. "What is it?" James knelt down to scratch Buddy behind the ears. "The people who were after Buddy? They've been arrested. Turns out they were part of a much larger operation, and your bravery helped us uncover it." Ethan felt a surge of pride. "So, it's really over." James smiled. "It's really over. Buddy is safe now." Ethan hugged Buddy tightly, relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could truly breathe. As James turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, and one more thing. There's someone who wants to meet Buddy." Ethan frowned, confused. "Who?" James grinned. "You'll see." The next day, Ethan and Buddy found themselves in a large, beautifully landscaped estate. Ethan's mom had come along, equally curious about who they were meeting. As they walked up to the front door, it opened to reveal a man Ethan immediately recognized. He was a famous actor, someone Ethan had seen in countless movies. "Hi there," the man said, smiling warmly. You must be Ethan." Ethan nodded, his mouth hanging open in shock. You're him." The man chuckled. "Guilty as charged. And you must be Buddy." He knelt down, holding out his hand. Buddy sniffed it cautiously, then wagged his tail. "I heard what you did for him," the actor said, looking up at Ethan. "You saved him. And I can't thank you enough." Ethan was still trying to process everything. "Buddy's your dog?" "He was," the actor said, standing up. "But it looks like he's found a new family now. And I couldn't be happier about that. Buddy deserves a fresh start, and it's clear he's found the perfect place." Ethan's mom stepped forward. "We'll take good care of him, I promise." "I know you will," the actor said. "That's why I wanted to meet you in person. To thank you and to let you know that if you ever need anything at all, you can count on me." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. "Thank you," he said. The visit ended with pictures, laughter, and even a promise of tickets to the actor's next big premiere. As they drove home, Ethan couldn't stop smiling. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Buddy became inseparable. Buddy seemed happier than ever, his playful energy and loving nature bringing joy to everyone around him. Ethan often thought about everything they had been through, the danger, the fear, and the uncertainty. But he also thought about the lessons he had learned, the importance of standing up for what's right, the power of kindness, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ethan sat on the porch with Buddy by his side. He scratched behind Buddy's ears, smiling as the little dog leaned into him. "You're my hero, Buddy," he said softly. Buddy looked up at him, his tail wagging, as if to say, "And you're mine." And in that quiet moment, Ethan knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because some bonds are too strong to break, and some stories are just the beginning of something even greater. The end.